der Ried, wo der Ewigste hat ihm ausgekleidet und hat ihm gemacht, dass soll sein der, was vereinzigt alle Jiden von dem Dorf, wo das ist der Nossi Hador, Hanossi Hu Hakeim, Teres Emme sagt, dass der Nossi vereinzigt in sich Hakeim, alle Jiden von klein bis groß, was befinden sich in sein Dorf, not geheißen verschreiben und notdrücken und befassen sein, verschiedene Takones, und befragt die Maimorim seine, die Teere sein, was in See hat gelebt und sich in See hereingelegt, was hat die alle Sachen, hört man sich und man redet wegen See und man lebt in See, verstärkt das noch mehr, wie bald Azari Bachai, man lebt mit seinen Teeren und mit seinen Takones und mit seinen Schlichus, mit allen seinen Schlichus, und das Gufe im Madgisch, Azaf Hu Bachai, als lebt zwischen uns und noch mehr in uns und lebt in Asamin Neufen, bis wann wird der Rieker und alle übrige Unionen und Menschen werden seine Schluchim mit dem Schuss, aber wird Schluche Shalodom Kemeise. Friede Schono Beschono wird noch mehr lebendiger und noch mehr starker und noch mehr aktiv zwischen uns und bei uns und durch uns bei jeder Jeden und bei allen Jeden, bis in der ganzen Welt.
Very, very moving words, and in a sense, we are all the Rebbe's shluchim, based on what the Rebbe said, in that each and every one of us in South Africa is probably here because of the Rebbe's convincing, the Rebbe's brachas that he gave to our country, the Rebbe's brachas that he gave to each and every one of us. And therefore, this evening, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to open the evening by introducing to you the program that we are here hosting this evening on behalf of the Lubavitch Foundation, Chabad House, as well as a group of shluchim who have worked very hard to put together this very, very important, very beautiful, and hopefully very inspiring program. We're going to begin with our speakers, the first of which is Rabbi Moshe Kesselman from Los Angeles, who's going to be addressing the Rebbe an appreciation that will be immediately followed by Rabbi Mendel Lipska, who is the head of the Lubavitch Foundation of Southern Africa. That will be followed by Rabbi Yossi Groner from Charlotte in North Carolina, who is going to be addressing the ideas behind Yechidus. And there is no one better qualified to speak about that than Rabbi Groner, who happens to be the son of the late, great confidant and secretary to the Rebbe, Rabbi Leibel Groner, who passed away recently in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic in New York and is sorely missed by Chabad around the world. Rabbi Groner will be followed by our own, and it was pointed out to me, triple Springbok, not double Springbok, as we had advertised, Mandy Yachad, who will be sharing some thoughts with us on personal connections with the Rebbe of late. And finally, we're going to be crossing to London to Rabbi Shlomo Levine, also South African born. Rabbi Levine, currently in South Hampstead in London, will be summing up the first part of the evening, the first hour, with a call to action, the Rebbe's call to action. And we hope that you will benefit, you will gain, you'll be inspired this evening by this wonderful program. I hand you over to Rabbi Kesselman in Los Angeles.
It's customary to begin every Chassidish Farbrengan with a l'chaim. So we want to make a special l'chaim. It is a very special day and a very powerful day. I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate in this, and to Farbrengan. Rabbi Katz introduced me as being from Los Angeles, but it's not my real yichus. My real yichus is that I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we're among family, we're among friends. L'chaim, Hashem should help us. We should be successful in fulfilling the shlichus and the mission that the Rebbe gave us, and to continue to live as he would want us to live every day. L'chaim, my dear friends, l'chaim. You know, our rabbis tell us that every generation has a Moshe Rabbeinu. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who had to lead a very reluctant group of Jews out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, and had to take them through 40 years in the desert and take them to the promised land, so it is that in every generation, the Moshe Rabbeinu, if you will, of that generation, it is incumbent upon him to go to the Jewish people and to convince them to go out of their own Egypt and to travel through the desert and to go to their promised land, wherever it is that they have to go in their generation. And when we think about the Rebbe's life and the example that he set and the appreciation that we have for the Rebbe, it's not difficult to understand what kind of a Mitzrayim, what kind of an Egypt the Rebbe had in our generation, in our times, to liberate the Jewish people from. Bear in mind that when the Rebbe arose, when the Rebbe took the position of leadership, albeit reluctantly, it was no more than 5 short years after the end of the Holocaust, which is actually historically the darkest hour of our people's history. And the Jewish community was reeling from the loss, had not even begun to digest the loss. And it wasn't difficult to be pessimistic at that time. In fact, anybody who had a brain cell and considered themselves intelligent in any way was very pessimistic about the Jewish people's future. And it was against that backdrop that the Rebbe took the position of leader of Chabad, of being the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, and came to a reluctant people and said, my dear brothers and sisters, let's go out of Mitzrayim. Let's believe in a brighter future. Let's believe in a Jewish tomorrow. There's a land flowing with milk and honey. There's a promised land. You're not slaves, you're free people. And not unlike the story of Mitzrayim, most of the Jewish people looked at Moshe Rabbeinu as if there was something wrong with him. And they said, look, we're a beaten people. We're victims. We've been decimated. We've just had, Rahman al-Islam, 6 million Jews perish. What do you want from us? And for 40 years, the Rebbe led the Jewish people out of this Mitzrayim and through the desert. And if I can continue the analogy, the desert the Rebbe led the Jewish people through, of course, was not a physical desert, but it was a spiritual desert, and we faced and still face the greatest danger to the Jewish existential existence that we faced in all of our history, and that is assimilation and intermarriage. So how did the Rebbe do it? Well, I don't know. The Rebbe did it, of course, as an emissary of Hashem. But what the Rebbe taught us is, and what the Rebbe showed us by example, the Rebbe showed us that all of this can be done with love. It can be done with unconditional belief in every Jewish man and every Jewish woman that exists in this world. And it comes with the belief that the Jewish people are stronger and more powerful and more deeply committed than even the Jewish people themselves are aware. And if we can just find a way to reach out to the Yiddish neshama, to the Yiddish soul, and if we can just find a way to communicate to it, the Rebbe taught us over and over again, we will find untapped, infinite resources of strength within every single Yiddish neshama, within every Jewish soul. You know, I want to share with you a very quick story. In my community here in Los Angeles, we have some Holocaust survivors. Some of them, many of them in their 80s, some of them even, may Hashem bless them, in their 90s. And one of the women shared with me that when she was actually a child and she was in the concentration camps, one night in the middle of the night, she woke up to a very strange sound. And it was the sound of a baby crying. She'd never heard in her conscious mind as a child in the concentration camps, she'd never heard this before. And so she asked one of the people who were next to her, who were lying next to her in the barracks, "What is that?" And the woman said to her, it's the sound of a baby crying. And as a little child, she said to herself, if that's the cry of a baby, so help me God, one day I will survive. I will have babies of my own. I will build a family, and I will rebuild and have babies and children and grandchildren just like that for many years to come. Hashem helped her, and she survived, and she had grandchildren, and she has grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and lived to see much, much Yiddish nachas from them. And on one occasion, I had the zchus to be at a bris of one of her great-grandsons. And as I went over to wish her mazel tov, she leaned over and whispered to me in my ear, she said, "This is my revenge against the Nazis, Yimach Shemam v'zichram." So the Rebbe taught and teaches a generation that no matter what we've been through, the Yiddish neshama can survive, it can thrive, it can burn, it can ignite, it can motivate, it can inspire, and it can even change the world. There was once a teacher who wrote to the Rebbe that after many years of teaching, he had decided to retire. He said, "Rebbe, I've worked so hard and taught for so many years. I'd like to retire. Let other people teach and take the mantle from here." He said, "I'll write a book in which I'll teach other people my teaching methods and how they can be good teachers and inspire children from here." And the Rebbe wrote to him like this. The Rebbe said, imagine you were a firefighter and you had the ability to save people from burning buildings. And one day you were walking down the street and you saw a building on fire. And people who were trapped in the building were waving both their arms out of the window, screaming for help. And you had the ability to save them. But instead of saving them, you decided it would be a good time to retire and write a book instructing and teaching other firefighters how they could be more effective in saving other people from burning buildings. The Rebbe said, any firefighter who would decide to retire in a moment like that would be guilty of the highest crimes. The Rebbe said, you want to retire? I'm so sorry. There is no time. The Rebbe said, you want to write a book teaching others how they should do their job? I'm so sorry, the Rebbe said. Now is not the time. The Jewish nation needs your help. There are people out there who are counting on you to save their lives physically or spiritually. Hashem has put you in a position where you can do something about it. Don't talk to me about how you want to help other people do their job. It's time for you to do yours. And so when a day like Gimmel Tammuz comes and we express our appreciation to the Rebbe for everything that he did for us, I can tell you with tremendous confidence, the Rebbe wouldn't be happy with us simply sitting here and saying, he was the Moshe Rabbeinu who elevated a generation and inspired them. Instead, the Rebbe would want every one of us to look into a mirror and say to ourselves, there is a little Moshe Rabbeinu hidden within me. There is a leader hidden within me. There is a shlichus and a mandate that I have to do, and I have to do it today. The Rebbe had the ability to communicate belief in people, even when they didn't believe in themselves. You know why I think this is so incredibly important, and Bedafka specifically, as we have this conversation in this Farbrengan today. I'll tell you why it is. As we commemorate Gimmel Tammuz in 2020, we're living in a time of tremendous, tremendous uncertainty. We don't know what life is going to look like in 3 months. We don't know what life is going to look like in 6 months. We don't know what life is going to look like in 3 weeks or in 3 days. Coronavirus has affected us in a very powerful way. And for many of us, we face uncertainty in terms of what our life will look like on a day-to-day basis, in a very fundamental way. And we look around ourselves and each other and we say to ourselves, well, what in heaven's name is going on? Life as we know it is slipping through our fingers. Every part of it is changing. But you know, my friends, a day like Gimmel Tammuz comes to remind us that there are certain things that never change. There are truths. There are divine principles in our lives. There's a Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation. Gimmel Tammuz comes to remind us that certain things never change. The Jewish people will always survive, will thrive in every situation. In every generation, there's a mandate and a call, something for a Yid to do. So long as the Rebbe is here to serve as our example, we remember that everything that we need to do in this world, we can do in a positive way, with unconditional love and Avas Yisrael for every Yid, the way the Rebbe embodied every day of his life. Gimmel Tammuz is here to remind us that we have nothing to fear. Only one question that we ask ourselves, that we need to ask ourselves every single day. What does the Rebbe want from me to do today? When I wake up in the morning, how would the Rebbe want me to make the world around me a better place today with whatever tools I have at my disposal? And that's the only relevant question. And if we can answer that, and if we can answer it honestly, and if without excuses we can go on and do even a small percentage of what the Rebbe wanted us to do, we'll make our own lives and the lives of the people around us and the entire world a better place on a consistent basis. You know what the Rebbe didn't like? He didn't like when people made excuses. He didn't like when people kvetched. He didn't like when people deflected. The Rebbe didn't like when people didn't see the potential inside themselves. So on this day, we're appreciative with everything we have to the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation, who teaches us that we're always stronger than we think we are. We can overcome anything and everything so long as we remember the power, the strength that we have within ourselves, so long as we remember that we are Yidden, Chasidim, Shluchim, so long as we remember the message that the Rebbe taught us and lived every single day, so long as we remember our own neshamas and our own eternal connection to Hashem and to all that is true and good in this world. With great honor and with great derech eretz, I want to introduce the next speaker, the Shliach Roshi, the head Shliach of South Africa, to whom my family and I owe a debt of gratitude. Thank you, Rabbi Lipsker, for facilitating our move to South Africa as the Rebbe's Shluchim in 1983. May Hashem bless you to continue all of your amazing work. Ladies and gentlemen, Moirai v'Rabosai, the Rebbe's Chief Ambassador to the Republic of South Africa, Harav Mendel Lipsker.
Thank you for those very warm, kind words. And please God, with Hashem's help, to live up to that which we have to do. I was asked to talk about the Rebbe's vision. And I thought long and hard. Pretty simple question, pretty simple answer. But as with most things that appear to be simple at the outset, as you think about them and you begin to analyze them, you begin to realize that it is far broader and deeper than you first thought. The Rebbe's vision. Try to define the Rebbe for one moment, and within seconds you'll be at a loss for words. A genius, a great teacher, a scholar in every single area of Torah of note, a leader, a prophet, one who brought miracles into the world. The list goes on and on and on. And yet, we have to define within a few minutes the Rebbe's vision. So I'm going to choose 3 points in the Rebbe's life, which gives us a bit of an insight into what the Rebbe's vision is. The Rebbe wrote that when he was a very young child, even before he began his formal education, a very young child, and our sages tell us that great men, tzaddikim, righteous people, even when they are children, infants, they already display the greatness that others will see with the passing of time. When the Rebbe was a very young boy, he said he had a dream in where he envisaged the world with the coming of Mashiach. Not a childish dream. The dream of a person who will become the Rebbe, leader of our generation. And he spoke about the vision of Mashiach, a perfect world, a world of absolute goodness, a world of absolute righteousness, where each and every single individual has his place in the fullest sense of the word. In 1951, when the Rebbe formally took upon himself the mantle of leadership publicly of Chabad, the Rebbe said a mimer, a Hasidic essay, in which he laid out, in a sense, his plans of leadership. And he said a number of things at the time. He spoke about we being the Dor Hashvi, the seventh generation. We being the seventh generation because the Rebbe, as the seventh Rebbe from the time of the Baal Atanya B'Shulchan Aruch, the first Rebbe of Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the Rebbe said we are the seventh generation, and what he was saying was based upon an essay, a mimer written by his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, talking about Kol Hashvin Chavivin, that all sevens are precious and dear. Not necessarily because they did anything extraordinary, not necessarily because they worked and deserved that place, but the Rebbe spoke about how each and every one of us is part of that seventh generation, our generation. Not that we asked for it, and not necessarily because we want it, but by divine providence, God's absolute control of every single thing that takes place in all of creation. God chose all of us to be a part of the seventh generation. And he said, what is the seventh generation? The seventh generation is the one that completes the fulfillment of God's intention of the world through erecting the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the divine presence comes into the world, obviously speaking about the concept of Mashiach yet again. The Rebbe said the duties of the seventh generation are extraordinary because they will be given treasures that has been hidden since time immemorial. The analogy that he gives of a king who has to perform a great, great battle and be victorious. The most precious gems that are hidden in the treasure houses of the king are taken out in order to achieve this great nitzachon, this great victory. And the Rebbe spoke about how each and every one of us, men, women, young, old, children, each and every one of us has a specific individual duty to fulfill. All of creation is waiting for the specific act that I will do that will help complete and bring to fulfillment the purpose of God's creation. And then in 1992, shortly before he had his illness, the stroke, the Rebbe handed all those present at that time another essay, another mimer of Ata Tetzava, which we see as, in a sense, a willing testament of the Rebbe, suggesting in coded language how when Moshe was absent from the Parsha in the Torah, his name is not mentioned, he wasn't there, what has to be done in order to complete this great task that God gave each and every one of us. The Rebbe, in a sense, was telling us there will be a moment where physically he will not be here. And he told us there will be great challenges in our lives, physical challenges, material challenges, particularly the challenge of materialism. And the Rebbe said how each and every one of us must have the courage to stand up to that challenge and do what has to be done in order to change the world. The Rebbe's vision, very simple, a perfect world without any flaws, no physical flaws, no spiritual flaws. A world where God's presence is felt and seen by each and every one of us. A world that has the greatness of God's glory. A world that has the concept of redemption in the fullest sense of the word, the concept of Mashiach. A world where all questions will be answered and all darkness will turn into light, the transformation of all negativity into something which is positive. He didn't only talk about a moment of greatness. He didn't talk about a great achievement. The Rebbe always spoke about a perfect world, a world without blemish, a world of absolute holiness. The vision of the Rebbe included each and every one of us. He often spoke about Moshe could have accomplished whatever he wanted to accomplish on his own. God, creator of heaven and earth, could have accomplished whatever he wanted on his own. But the great gift that God gave us is that he included each and every one of us. And from time to time, we forget who we are and what we have to do. But each and every one of us has that great blessing that he can be a partner with the Rebbe, a partner in the fulfillment of God's creation. Tonight is Gimmel Tammuz. We sit and reflect upon the fact that each and every one of us has been blessed by his leadership in so many ways. To this day, we write to the Ohel for his blessings. We connect. We study his Torah. We do whatever we can, most of the time, to fulfill his vision and to fulfill our purpose. Tonight is a night that has the power and energy to give us that clear direction, to recommit with a full heart, to recommit with joy, to recommit with strength, with power, to continue doing what the Rebbe wants us to do. A world of goodness and kindness, to reach out to everyone, to go way beyond our seeming ability and to bring out the extraordinary that we have within ourselves. We are the children of the Rebbe. We are the seventh generation. We will greet Mashiach and once again be united in a physical sense with the Rebbe who blessed us by sharing his vision with us. And now it gives me great pleasure and privilege to introduce a dear friend and colleague with whom I've spent many hours of work on matters of Chabad throughout the world, Rabbi Yossi Groner, the head shliach of the Carolinas. Rabbi Groner.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Lipsker, for the introduction and for your warm and inspiring words and reminding us that we are all part of the Rebbe's generation. And indeed, as Rabbi Lau said on Gimmel Tammuz 26 years ago, that even though the Rebbe was childless, but on the day of his passing, millions have been orphaned, but orphaned only in a physical way, not in a spiritual way. I want to thank the Shluchim from South Africa and the Lubavitch Foundation and all the rabbis that helped organize this event. I reflect on the warm reception that I myself received when I had visited Johannesburg a few years ago and conducted several Farbrengans there. I was asked to speak about Yechidus. Yechidus is about an intimate connection that every one of the Rebbe's disciples and everyone in the generation of the Rebbe was privileged to be able to have with the Rebbe. Not everybody took advantage of it, but those that took advantage and they actually succeeded in securing a private audience with the Rebbe say that it was the most momentous time in their life. And Yechidus in the olden days was open mainly to elder Hasidim that have refined themselves, Hasidim that were able to comprehend the greatness of the teachings of the Rebbe. The Rebbe in our generation opened up Yechidus to the entire world, to the entire generation. So you can find great rabbis that went into Yechidus, to simple teenagers, to professionals, to military people, heads of government, and ordinary people, that they all had the opportunity to go into Yechidus. So I want to talk a little bit about Yechidus, and as it was mentioned earlier, in merit of my father who passed away on the night before Pesach, that the Rebbe had given him the responsibility to be in charge of the Yechidus, to arrange the appointments, to let people in, to make sure that they're there for their allotted times. My father would also ask people after they walked out from Yechidus if they can share something with him so that he can record it so that it wouldn't get lost just in case they forgot it. So there are a lot of interesting stories about Yechidus. So let's talk about the word Yechidus. The word Yechidus comes from the word Yachid, which means singular. Yechidus means to have a private audience with the Rebbe. The Rebbe took it a little further and said that Yechidus is actually a meeting of the Yechida of the soul. The Medrash tells us that there are 5 layers to the soul. The deepest, most quintessential part of the soul is the Yechida Shebenefesh, the Yechida that's in the Neshama. And when a Chassid or any person would go into Yechidus, it was a meeting of the Yechida of the Chassid or the Yechida of the visitor with the Yechida of the Rebbe. And for that reason, it was quite intense. Just to draw in our imagination, the Rebbe would start welcoming people in Yechidus at night, not during the day. It was very rare that the Rebbe would hold Yechidus during the day. During the day, the Rebbe did his regular, what we call regular work, running the global Jewish community and answering letters and studying Torah and whatever was required during the day. So usually at 8:30 in the evening, the Rebbe would start receiving people. In the earlier years, it was 3 nights a week, and then later it became twice a week. What's interesting is that when people were told that they have an appointment to see the Rebbe, and it was 2:00 a.m. or 3:00 a.m., this was something which would surprise them. But what was more surprising was that even if a person walked in at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., and it was after the Rebbe had seen so many people during that evening and talked to them, the Rebbe seemed fresh and awake as if he just started the Yechidus. And the explanation to that is because the Rebbe engaged the Yechida, the inner aspect of his soul, the quintessential aspect of the soul, and connected with us. You could tell when someone was ready to go on Yechidus weeks or perhaps months before. The preparation, especially when we were in yeshiva as students, yeshiva bachrim, you could tell on a yeshiva bachar, when a yeshiva bachar was preparing for Yechidus, his davening was different, his study of Torah was different, his conduct was different, it was superior. He was totally in tune with his neshama, he was totally in tune with the spirituality. So by the time he went into Yechidus, and for most of us, the day of the Yechidus was actually a fast day. It was a day of inner reflection, of introspection, so that the moment that we're going into is not just a moment of quantity. We didn't measure by how many minutes we were in Yechidus, but it was qualitative. It was the quality of the moment, the quality of the engagement. The Rebbe was certainly all there for the visitor. The question always was, were we there? There's a story of a yeshiva student who was afraid that he would forget what the Rebbe would say, so he equipped himself with a hidden recorder. In those days, it was little cassette recorders, and he put it into his pocket, and he had a little mic, and he walked in to the Yechidus. In the middle of the Yechidus, the Rebbe stopped him, and he asked him, "So who went into Yechidus to see me tonight, you or the recorder?" Because the Rebbe picked up on him that he wasn't all there, because he was relying that he would be able to listen to it later. The whole experience of Yechidus was the intimate moment that you were connected with the Rebbe. This concept of connectivity is very important to each and every one of us, because even though the Rebbe was a global leader, and the Rebbe had in mind all of the hundreds of thousands and millions of Jews, but yet the individual wasn't lost to him. And when the individual connected with him, he was all there with them. I want to share a personal story from my father, which will illustrate the intensity of the Yechidus. I have probably never told this story in public before, but because it's Gimmel Tammuz, I think that it's worthwhile hearing. I did not hear this from my father. He never shared it with me, but I heard it from my mother. My father was the one that stood by the door, but he himself also would go into Yechidus for his own Yechidus once a year on his birthday. One year on his birthday, he was due to go into Yechidus that evening, and he would spend hours working in the Rebbe's room. The Rebbe, when he would work in his room, would sit by the side of his desk, not by the head of his desk. It was only during the time of Yechidus that he would sit in front of his desk or whenever he was receiving people. All of a sudden, the Rebbe turns to my father and he says to him, "So doch dein Yom Holedet sein. It's your birthday today. And most probably you are planning to go into Yechidus tonight." And my father said, "Yes." So the Rebbe asked him, "Have you prepared your note?" Because when you would go into Yechidus, you would hand a note. It was called a pidyon nefesh, a pan. It was something that would redeem your soul. And you would give it to the Rebbe, and over there you would put out the petition for a blessing. And if it was something specific that you needed, you would write a specific request. So the Rebbe asked my father, "Mistamas tutsugi greitem settle. Perhaps you already prepared the note that you want to hand me." And my father said, "Yes, I have it." So the Rebbe said, "So we will do the Yechidus now." The Rebbe stood up from his place and walked over to his Yechidus place, and he sat down and he became very serious. His face literally changed and he straightened himself out. And he looked at my father with that look, and he put his hand out to take the note. And my father was in trepidation. He immediately put on his gartel, the Hasidic belt that you use by davening, and he walked over with trepidation to the Rebbe and gave the note to the Rebbe. The Rebbe read the note, and then the Rebbe gave him his blessing. And after the Yechidus was over, the Rebbe picked himself up, walked back, and resumed working, which that shows that Yechidus wasn't just a chance encounter between someone and the Rebbe. It actually took from the Rebbe himself that he would reach into his own Yechida, into his own quintessential part of the soul, which anything about the Rebbe is something that this is incomprehensible, that we could never imagine. So the moments of Yechidus were very, very precious. But unfortunately, in the mid-70s, the Rebbe said that people were not treating the Yechidus the way they should. So he began to minimize the times that he would take people in privately. And he only allowed guests to come in. And then eventually it was all changed with the Yechidus Klolius, with the general Yechidus as groups. But the Rebbe said that even though the groups came in, somehow there was the ability to relate to each individual. In fact, the Rebbe had written to several people that asked for a private audience after the Rebbe stopped it. And the Rebbe said, "You will conduct yourself like many others who enter into Yechidus during the Farbrengan, during the Rebbe's gathering." But the Rebbe did not disappoint, because in 1986, the Rebbe began a new tradition. And that tradition was that every Sunday after davening, the Rebbe would walk out of his room and stand at a designated place and greet thousands. And that became the Yechidus. It became the Yechidus, even though it was for a moment, but you saw the way that Rebbe received everyone with that intensity. So I just want to finish with another personal story that I saw with my own eyes. I was standing in line to receive the blessing and the dollar from the Rebbe, and that moment was just a moment that when the Rebbe placed his eyes on you, you felt as if you were in a spiritual soul scanner. You go to the airport and you go through a body scan. When you went through the Rebbe, and the Rebbe looked with his eyes at you, there was nowhere to hide. And for that reason, people were frightened. The Rebbe didn't mean to frighten people, but this was the natural reaction, because when the Rebbe looked at a person, he knew everything about the person, what the person has done from the day that he came into this world until today. So when you had that moment with the Rebbe, it was in a way very intense. But then the Rebbe, on the other hand, was equal in his intensity as he would look at the person. And I remember standing in line, and there was a 14-year-old girl that had been two people in front of me, and she had a special request from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe looked at her intensely and then smiled and gave her a blessing. And while that was happening, the front door, which was called the VIP door, opened up. And in came the mayor of New York City, Mayor Koch, with his whole entourage. Now, when Mayor Koch would walk into any place in New York, everything would stop because the New York mayor was like the king of the city. The Rebbe was so involved in talking to the person that he was talking to, even though she was a teenager, that nothing else existed except this individual. And it was only after the Rebbe finished and gave her the blessing with a smile, and he looked up and he saw the mayor and he greeted him. That kind of intense connection is what describes what Yechidus is, at least to an outsider. Now, today we have the opportunity to enter in Yechidus as well, and that is by visiting the Ohel. When we go to the Ohel and we enter in to the inner chamber and we daven and we write our note, that is Yechidus, and the Rebbe will find a way to answer. The story about Rav Mendel Futafas, the very famous Chassid, who was exiled in the Gulag of Russia in the mid-50s, and at one point he felt that he needed to enter into Yechidus. And he did all the preparations that was possible for him while he was in Siberia in the Gulag. He davened better, he learned better, and he mentally wrote the note. And then the time came in, and he mentally entered in to the Rebbe's room for Yechidus. And he put forth his request. When he succeeded in coming out of Russia and coming to his wife's home in England, she said, by the way, a number of years ago, we received a letter from the Rebbe addressed to you, and we never opened it. And now is the time to open it. When he opened up the letter, he was shocked because the letter was dated that very day that he entered in visually and mentally into the Yechidus with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe gave him the answer that he was requesting. That in itself tells you that Yechidus is something that touches the soul, the quintessential soul. And may we be zeicha that we should be able to see the Rebbe face to face and to be able to connect even now in the greatest way, especially on this day of Gimmel Tammuz. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mendy Yachad. We have a friend here in Charlotte by the name of Arthur Othmeyer, who says that he went to school together with him and he was a great sportsman. So I'm sure he will be able to share his insights about his connection with the Rebbe. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Groner. Unlike most, if not all the other panelists, the concept of a Rebbe, the Nasi Adar, the leader of the generation, the leader of the global Jewish community, unites every Jew and connects every Jew to Hashem, was not something with which I grew up. While this changed somewhat in 1972 when I was first exposed to Chabad, the arrival in South Africa of Rabbi and Rebbetzin Lipke as official Shluch of the Rebbe, it was still not a concept with which I identify as a teenager, or even as I entered my university years. This notwithstanding the fact with the encouragement and assistance of the Lipskes, my parents traveled to the Rebbe for Sukkot in 1977 and had Yechidus, as Rabbi Groner said, a private audience of the Rebbe, before the advent of the Rebbe's heart attack on Shmini Atzeret that year. During this time, I was more involved in building a professional and sporting career. And while I was certainly part of the Chabad community, it was only in the late 1980s and early 1990s, after getting married to Pam, that we started developing more of a connection to the Rebbe. One of the fruits of which was the most amazing bracha we received from the Rebbe in February of 1992. At the time, Pam was pregnant with our third child, Tadi, but that's for another time. With this background, I begin sharing my connection with the Rebbe by admitting that my biggest regret is that I never traveled to the Rebbe before Gimmel Tammuz and never availed myself of the opportunity to share in the tangible, physical interaction with the Rebbe, be it attending a Farbrengan, being privileged to have a private or even a group Yechidus, receiving $1 from the Rebbe's holy hand, or just to be in 770 when the Rebbe arrived for a minyan. One doesn't always get the opportunity to get a second chance, but thankfully this was not the case for me. And post Gimmel Tammuz, I was given 3 very tangible opportunities to establish a meaningful connection to the Rebbe, 2 of which I share tonight. and which is very much a continuation of the subject covered by Rabbi Groner. The first opportunity presented itself 15 years ago, almost to the day. Avi Rabin was getting married in California on the 12th of Tammuz 2005, and I agreed to attend as the Yachad family representative, somewhat reluctantly, I might add, as I was warned about the schlep that it was to get to Los Angeles and back, and also as it cut short a holiday with my family in Eastern Transvaal. At the age of 44, it was the first time I would be going to America, and I booked to go by New York. Dovi Rabin was traveling to the States via Washington. As we were only flying out that night to LA, I arranged to meet him at the airport and then go to the oil together so that he could explain the protocols and procedures. As Ashgacha practice would have it, Dovi was late. Maybe not a surprise, but in his defense, it was not his fault. He's played with the late. And so, being an alien in New York, I made my way to the oil. For some, perhaps inexplicable reason, and also being that it was so soon after Gimmel Tammuz, when thousands of people came to 770 and to the oil, there were hardly any people at the oil. So without any real time or space constraints, I spent almost 3 hours at the oil that day. For the most part, totally understood. Reciting my Naloshon, saying Tehillim, and having what I regarded then and still regard as my private yechidus with the Rebbe. Baruch Hashem, I've had the zchus subsequently to go to the oil many times, including for the l'chaim at the engagement of each of the 4 children who are married. And Pam and I make a point of always having enough time in New York when flying to or from Miami in order to visit the oil. The second opportunity was 5 years later when I attended the Shluchim conference in Cheshvan of 2010. The Shabbos of the conference was Shabbos Mavach in Kislev, and I heard that the Rebbe's room, which served as the Rebbe's office and study from the time of his arrival in America in 1941 throughout his years of leadership, and which I had never seen and into which I had never been, was going to be open on Shabbos morning from 8 o'clock for saying Tehillim. And I was warned that it was likely to be pretty packed. I made sure I was up early, went to mikveh, and got to 70 around 7:15, being one of the first there. That didn't really help because come 8 o'clock, the room was opened. It was pretty much a free-for-all, and certainly not first come, first served. Nevertheless, the wait, the pushing and shoving, and the sardine-like 2.5 hours that I was there was certainly worth it. Although this time I was far from being on my own, it felt like I was having a second, this time perhaps group yechidus, as opposed to my earlier private yechidus at the oil. Thank God I've been able to relive this experience a few times. When I've been at 770 on Shabbos Mavarkim, thankfully I might add at times when the room has not been as packed. So how does this translate into connecting with the Rebbe today? There are a myriad of ways to connect to the Rebbe, whether by way of learning Sikhs and Amorim, writing to the Rebbe, following his directives, and particularly in the times in which we find ourselves now, by doing acts of goodness and kindness. For me, in addition to these though, the 2 experiences which I've shared, and particularly my yechidus at oil 15 years ago, have enabled me to establish, nurture, and hopefully grow a real connection to the Rebbe. Although I'm not always successful, I try to recall and relive these 2 experiences when I say the verses of the Rebbe's name, which I am privileged to share, at the end of the Amidah, and by so doing to maintain and enhance the close connection which I felt then. I conclude by strongly encouraging anyone who hasn't yet been to oil to take every effort to visit as soon as they can and to experience for themselves the inspiration and sense of immediate and ongoing connection which I did. May we merit the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days when we will be reunited with our beloved Rebbe physically and have that long-awaited yechidus in person. And now I hand over to Rabbi Shlomo Levine, Rabbi of South Hampstead Congregation In London, we'll talk on a call to action, what we need to do now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mandy, and a very good evening to all of you, and a very warm welcome to all of my many long-standing friends in South Africa. So the Rebbe had a vision for the world, a vision to bring the world into a different place through the Mashiach. He did everything that he could with every single breath of his holy life. And then he handed over the baton to us and he said, and now it is over to you. You have to complete the task. So the question for us tonight in the last of these talks is, what do we need to do to bring Mashiach? I've had a scan across the over 580 people who are participating tonight's program, and I see a very broad spectrum of individuals. Some are shluchim and shluchot who are running Chabad houses or Chabad institutions. Others are communal leaders in one form or another. Some are businessmen and businesswomen, housewives, students, academics, all kinds of people here tonight, and too numerous and diverse to mention. Some of the people here tonight, as we've heard, are people who had direct contact with the Rebbe in his holy life, and for others who are generationally removed from that time, from those extraordinary years, the contact with the Rebbe has been through his teachings and through his Hasidim. But what we have in common here together, every single one of us who are part of this program over here, that what has drawn us to this event is that each one of us have been touched in some way or another by the Rebbe's powerful vision. And therefore we need to find a way to articulate a unifying set of underlying principles that apply equally to all of us in this task, despite the immense diversity of people who are participating. And so I want to offer to you tonight 3 principles. The first one I will introduce with a story. So it's Yom Kippur. The shul is absolutely overflowing. The rabbi is in absolutely fine form. You're all sinners, he shouts out. You've done terrible things. It's time to do teshuvah. Everybody in the entire shul is crying their eyes out. One man is sitting absolutely stony-faced. His neighbor turns to him and says to him, "Why aren't you crying?" So he answers, "He's not talking to me. I'm not a member here." For the Rebbe, every single one of us was a member here. There was no distinction in his life between a card-carrying Lubavitcher with a yichus that went all the way back to the Alter Rebbe and beyond, or a humble Jew who stood for hours in a line waiting to receive $1 from the Rebbe, or a child sitting underneath the Rebbe's table at Farbrengan. Every single person in the Rebbe's eyes was equally responsible to fulfill the task, each person in their own very special, unique way. We very often talk about the need to change the world. That is a mistake. The first need is not to change the world, but to change ourselves, or more particularly, to change our mindsets. To fulfill the Rebbe's vision, we have to have rooted in our psyches, inside our heads, the conviction, Ein hadavar talui ele bi. This entire matter depends only upon me. I am the one who's responsible to bring Mashiach. This is what God empowered me to do in my life. This is what the Rebbe was able to touch inside my soul, to give me the ability to be able to fulfill that personal shlichut that has been handed to every single one of us. Never mind all the other great, more talented, more religious, more learned, more spiritual people in the world. Without my participation, it's not going to happen. And so it's time for us to get off our backsides and to start to do what needs to be done. The second principle is absolutely fundamental to the Rebbe's teachings. Ever since the Six-Day War in 1967, we have lived in a Jewish world in which the phrase Kiruv Harachokim has been part of the common currency. I don't believe that the Rebbe ever used this expression, or I never heard him use this expression. Instead, in Chabad, we speak about Hafotzes Hamayonos, a wellspring that springs forth, that spreads out. there's a world of difference between Kiruv HaRechokim and Hafotzos HaMayonos. Kiruv HaRechokim implies that I am high, you are low, and you, poor thing, I will draw you closer to my level. Hafotzos HaMayonos means that I am a wellspring that gushes forth with such force, with such energy, that wherever I reach, whoever I touch, are enveloped and moved by the spiritual force that is inside of me and that I exude. Relative levels of religiosity in this engagement are entirely irrelevant. I contact you, I connect with you because you are a Jew. I am not on a mission to convert you. I respect you for who you are. I make no value judgments about you. I'd like to tell you a story that Rabbi Lipsker has never heard. Many, many years ago, I used to attend the old Chabad Shul in Harrow Road in Yeovil. It was the first year that the Lipskers had arrived in South Africa, 1969, 1970, I don't remember the exact year. I walked into a shul, that little shul, one Shabbat, and I saw a friend who I'd known from university sitting in shul. And I have to say that he was probably the last person I ever expected to see sitting in a shul. As it happens, he's probably participating in the event tonight, but I haven't been able to find him amongst all these people. So I turned to him and I said to him, tell me, why are you here? You of all people, what are you doing in shul? He pointed to Rabbi Lipsker and he said, you see that man? He has inspired me. I want to be part of his world. My friends, that is what we mean by Hafotzos HaMayonos. It's not just the wellsprings of the teachings of Hasidus, but it is the Jews who have become the inspirational embodiment of those teachings. In order to fulfill the Rebbe's vision, we have to be inside of ourselves full to overflowing. And that doesn't come by itself. It comes with immense hard work. It comes with learning Hasidus. It comes with davening. It comes with doing those things which the Rebbe asked us to do. It comes in participating in the community. It comes with connecting with the Rebbe through his teachings. Only then does one have the koach, the power, the energy to see the task through. And I have one third principle to offer to you tonight. Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, is a powerful and a very dramatic theme in the story of Chabad. Without it, the vibrant Jewish world that we enjoy today, whether in South Africa or England or Russia or America, would simply not have come about. Every one of the Lubavitch Rebbeim, from the Alter Rebbe down, and of course including the Rebbe of our generation, literally put their lives on the line, as did many of their devoted Hasidim in every generation, so that the vision of a messianic world would be kept alive. Thank God, those difficult times have passed. But the importance of Mesiras Nefesh has not gone away. Some people still like to think about Mesiras Nefesh in very dramatic terms, in metaphoric terms, like a person who jumps off a building and shouts Lubavitch on the way down. That's drama for you. That's spreading the word of Lubavitch. That's not what Mesiras Nefesh actually means for us. Mesiras Nefesh means to do an act in which you may be profoundly, personally outside your own comfort zone. It may be a very small act. It may be a small act of kindness, a gesture of compassion, an arm around a troubled friend, a meal to a stranger, a welcoming smile. But it is the point at which I am going to become personally discomforted in order to bring comfort to another human being. That is the essence of the Mesiras Nefesh that is asked and demanded of us. So I hope with these three principles that the matter depends on me, an overflowing wellspring, and Mesiras Nefesh in every task, big or small, that we have with us the tools today in our own lives to be successful in completing the task that the Rebbe handed over to us, to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mhera v'yameinu, amen, and thank you. I believe now that we're going to the global program, and so over to you.
Rabbi Shochat.
Friends, members of the community, distinguished Rabbanim, the eloquent speakers who have spoken before us, we've been taken on a journey. Appealing to our mind, giving us insight into the Rebbe's teachings, and giving us a feel for what that personal connection is like. The next section of tonight's program, some 45 to 60 minutes, is going to be giving us a different perspective. It's going to be traveling inward, leading us into a very touching and insightful segment of the program, a program which is going to give us a glimpse, a program which will capture the intensity, the emotion, the unbreakable loving bond that exists between a Chassid and Rebbe. It's a program which is going to include a number of speakers. It's going to include a number of anecdotes and experiences. A program which is going to be sharing a number of snippets of the Rebbe. And it's a program which is going to culminate in a real live entry into the Rebbe's oil, into that resting place, the powerful form of Yechidus in our contemporary times. Join with us, travel with us, be uplifted with us, be inspired, sing, listen, open your mind and open your heart, and allow tonight to be a moment of connection, a moment of impact, something that empowers us to march forward with the Rebbe until such time that we see him again.
Friends, many thanks for joining us, and a huge yasher koach to all of the speakers. As you can see on the screen, there is a countdown of 4 minutes until the global program begins. We are going to watch a short video of the Rebbe and at the connection to a yard site, and we will then cross live to the Rebbe's Ohel. Many thanks for joining us, and please stay on for a very beautiful program.
A Jahrzeit a Istalkus von Anossi Hadei ist eine sichere Sache. Bedugme wie die Gemorre so, wenn du gehst zu den ersten Reihe Israel, wo das gewähnt Moshe Rabbeinu, also gewähnt Ato, Eime du Mishamish Bamori. Mirte war Jedur von dem Baal Hayebulis Vater, was geschrieben bekerstet zu der Jebule von seinem Vater, was gewähnt seine Male Mokke. Als Tzadikim, Rei Yisrael, Blei Yazvu, Tzema Risam, a viele, wie sie gefunden sich, Blachre, wie sie seinen Eber bemoren, seien sie Meere, Rachmim und Maschpir, Brochis, Vatzlochis, Tzema Risam, Dole Mato, verstandig und bepasst Likromo in a Iron Neiru, in a lichtige Anweisung, was jeder sie sei Jinyan und als Mann, was sie verbunden darf mit Broche und Hamschocho, ואדרבה, דווקא wenn das ist noch verbunden mit der Istalku של צדיקים, Allahas kame bekame von Anossi Hadei, was mal Atzka mit dem Shamesh, ist auf der Hallen mit dem Shamesh und bet auf jeder Rieden und auf alle Rieden und auf dem ganzen Dorf, alle Brochis, was Lochis, in was nur menetlich sein.